Welcome to Body of Light, Episode 9, featuring Dr. Asa Hershoff, Lama Jimpa. So I first discovered Lama through YouTube. He had a video of him giving a talk about rainbow body and light body at a Vajrayana conference. I was blown away by his 20-minute presentation because he talked about rainbow body and light body not just from a Vajrayana practitioner traditional standard and approach, but also from a scientific approach of what is actually required to create a light body. What's the science behind it? What's actually going on in the body? What's actually needed besides the actual practices to create a light body? So he was coming from this firsthand experience of being a practitioner of different forms of Vajrayana Buddhism. He's coming from a naturopathic doctor background, many years of studying naturopathic medicine, energy work, energy healing, and the science behind what is actually happening within the body, what is required to create a light body form, specifically around the 5 elements. He has books and cards and courses on the 5 elements and how they relate to not just light body, but healing and spiritual development and overall well-being. So it was a very wonderful, unique experience to talk to someone like Lama Jimpa, Asa Hershoff. I really appreciate how straightforward, direct, one can say blunt he is with how he speaks, how he delivers information and his thoughts and opinions and knowledge. I'm still at this point really focused on, can Western people engaged in Western modern affairs living in the Western world attain a light body, create a light body, achieve rainbow body? Can people in the Western world engage in Western affairs embody the same characteristics, attributes, qualities as enlightened beings, as masters who attain rainbow body and light body? Can you and I reach to that same level of embodiment as the ascended masters, as the masters of light body? Is that possible? And if yes, how? So that was a big focus here. We also talk about tukdom. What is tukdom? Is it the same as rainbow body or different? Does everyone have a light body? How does one create their own light body? We even talk about if animals have and can create a light body and dissolve into light. And then we go into great detail about what is actually happening inside the body and around the body when the bodies shrink or dissolve into light, leaving hair, teeth, nails, and such. We go deeply also into the different practices that lead to rainbow body, how Doctor says that different practices and forms of any type of spiritual practice has a specific type of rainbow body or light body outcome. So this and a lot more we go into in this interview. So please enjoy Lama Jimpa, Dr. Asa Hershoff. Well, great to meet you, Doctor. Thank you so much for being here.
Nice to meet you.
You've been on the top of my list on people that I needed to have for this project. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, that's nice to hear. I'm not sure why, but it's nice to hear.
I respect and value your approach, having such vast experience and knowledge in the Vajrayana world and with rainbow body knowledge, or you could say, teachings, and then also the scientific naturopathic world that you come from.
For some reason, I'm fortunate in that those very disparate, you could say, disciplines came together, including, of course, my love of art, because I designed all these cards.
Oh,
I love graphic design. I was supposed to go into art, but somehow the 4 decades and then some in natural medicine and the lust for knowledge and information and the crazy travels and so on all have come together to make sense and have just naturally, my way of coming to understanding is probably similar to anybody's creative process. You do as much research and investigation and practice and experience as you can. Then you have to just be patient, let that percolate I call the crucible of the soul, and then see what percolates. You're sort of trusting inner wisdom mind, higher mind, hopefully, to bring you some answers. It's
Yeah.
actually similar to the questions you asked me, where I find them they're unusual questions, because I said, nobody can answer these questions. Nobody knows this. Nobody can tell you this. And then I just let that percolate, and I said, oh yeah, I have some great answers. I don't know from where, but something rises up, and I do trust that. It's the same with my experience as a homeopath over these many years. Um, in the very early days, it was, gee, I got to come up with a remedy. How am I going to find something that really matches this person? And eventually you relax and you go, you know what? I know that by the end of a half hour or an hour, it will be present. It'll be there in the room. That information will be present. So just relax and have a good dialogue and a good listening experience, and trusting. So in the same way, and especially with 3-year retreat, I learned to trust that wisdom voice and to recognize it.
Right.
It's very clear when it's speaking. So
Right.
different than our own chattering little nonsense ego. I checked into your background and so on, and I appreciate where you're coming from and what you're bringing to the table. So it's wonderful. I mean, the prerequisite of all of this is earnestness, as one great master, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj in Bombay, said back in the days, and we was speaking in the slums of Ketwadi in Bombay, and that he said that was the most important thing, was earnestness. So yes, a sincere desire to unfold and search out in search of the miraculous, to quote the book.
I'd like to jump in with that first question that I like to ask everyone, and that is, what is the Tibetan rainbow body?
Well, it's not exclusively Tibetan, of course. The
Right.
rainbow body is a pan-global phenomena, but in the Tibetan tradition, they've sort of let's call it the Himalayan Buddhist tradition, or Vajrayana, it's certainly become more prominent, or people are more aware of that phenomena, because it was not a hidden. It's still esoteric, but that esoteric information, it was readily available. Whereas in Christianity, it's more of a secret behind the scenes somewhere, and we have an exoteric way of promoting ethics and values and meaning and a spiritual attitude, but some of these inner techniques are not freely available. They're quite hidden. So the definition: rainbow body, light body, of which there's actually, in the Tibetan tradition, there's several different styles or types of rainbow body, but it is a potential or a possibility inherent in human form, in the human mind body, whereby with certain knowledge, certain types of exercises, and summoning in certain external forces, one can actually create a secondary or even a tertiary form or body, one that is composed of higher frequency substances, such that it can not only has radically different functions, but can even survive the death of the physical body. It's questionable whether it's actually just composed of light or photons, but you could say high frequency materials that may be outside the realm of what we understand as even electromagnetic, but it would be invisible to our normal senses or appear in some luminous form, as we see by the nimbus around in various traditions all over the world, paintings and sculptures and so on, of a radiant nimbus or arches of rainbow light around an individual who's considered to be of a high development. So that's what it is, basically. It's a potential that is difficult to realize. It's, in my definite opinion, it's not something that's inherent or that everybody has a light body, not at all. It's something that has to be developed, and it's a lifetime project. And many of us can at least hope to, which might be answering another question, can hope to achieve a level at which we can continue at least to develop light body in a future life, or we can incarnate. And I had written a blog not too long ago that might be a little bit controversial, but I do follow the Gurdjieffian model or concept is that even reincarnation is not a given. You have to, we see in nature, it doesn't make sense in nature that we're all handed this capacity on a plate. Some seeds, as it says in the Bible, some seeds fall on rock, some fall on fallow ground and can sprout. So not everyone can have that possibility to develop a light body or even to reincarnate. If nothing has developed, then there's nothing to continue. Then it will be dust to dust, ashes to ashes, solar rays to solar rays, lunar to lunar. As John G. Bennett said, then a part of us is recycled, and he calls it the soul stuff pool. You imagine this vast pool of soul stuff that can be put together to create a human being that can incarnate as a human being. Whether that perpetuates depends very much on how much one can develop. So light body formation is also a way to assure or to work towards actual reincarnation. Otherwise, you're here today and gone tomorrow. So that's my definition.
For clarification, is rainbow body and light body two different things to you?
No, they're just two different terms. But
Okay.
in Tibetan Buddhism, there's considered you could say the lesser light body and the greater light body. I'm not quite sure what those terms mean in that tradition. It's that so much of the tradition is oral or carefully guarded with a few individuals or with the individuals who have attained, or it's unknown. Unfortunately, in many of these traditions, especially the Tibetan tradition, the idea is just do these practices and forget about it. They don't really try to understand it. Or if you understand it, it's in the mythological or poetic or the jargon of the tradition itself. So, it's kind of a it's an echo chamber. You're answering the question with your own jargon. So it's not really an answer. So one has to make these discoveries oneself along the way, of course. And we haven't had enough time in the West to fully be able to explain the sequence and the process in our own unique modern language or understandings, psycho-spiritual understandings of today.
You mentioned there's in the Tibetan system, there's different forms of rainbow body. What are those forms, and would you consider tukum as one of those forms?
I can't really tell you about those different traditional models, what difference there is in terms of some structuring of light body. I can't tell you the difference, but you had asked the question, the difference between shrinking down phenomena and the complete disappearance phenomena, except for the hair, nails, and so on. But as far as tukum is not a rainbow body. Tukum is certainly a preparation. It's for those who are not familiar with it, at the time of death, great masters are left in a meditation posture. They enter a state of non-decay for 3 days is typical, in which even though they're definitely deceased, there's no pulse, there's no breath, the heart is still warm. And that's been witnessed by many Western individuals. And so it is a situation where the individual, through their great skill at the time of death, are able to enter the central channel of the body, and specifically the heart center, which is in the center of the central channel. The central channel is, you could call it 0 point. You could call it the Dharmakaya, the space of Dharma. But really what it is the vessel, or at least a channel, whether there's an actual, you could say a vessel because there's a structure to it, an energetic structure, from which all vitality flows forth. So it's related to our just being alive moment to moment. But it's also the place of our original consciousness or pure consciousness beyond object, phenomena, characteristics, etc., beyond coming, going, etc., all nomenclature cannot be applied to that. So they're existing in pure consciousness while, and this is more my take on it, while a certain process of transformation is taking place. You could say it's a gestation that's taking place. People that practice yoga and different internal practices, Salung, energy practices, know that there's these things within the channels that relate to the chakras, which are called granthi, or knots. Of course, nobody's tying any knots anywhere, even though in pictures you'll see these knots. Okay, it's an image. But what they are is, I call them one-way valves. They're valves in which this consciousness and this vivifying life energy, this tree of life, brings us aliveness moment by moment. And that happens through the chakras, major and minor. And so it's like electricity running down through the wires and enlivening our whole body. But there are these one-way valves so that the energy is not returning the other way. We're not meant to, during our lifetime, when I say meant to, normal biological life is designed such that you have these valves so you're not popping into your central channel. Can you imagine? You're trying to do a little typing. Whoa, okay, now I'm in pure consciousness. I'm no longer, so that doesn't happen. And it's not meant to happen. Enlightenment is, a possibility of untying the knots or entering through those granthi, usually at the chakras, but you're reaching in one way or another. It sounds violent, but it is a violence in a certain way. You're breaching those knots and you're entering the central channel before death. And that's why it is often called, that you're dying while alive. That's a saying that's been used in Christianity and Judaism, you name it, and Sufism, as a way of expressing the phenomena that's happening. You're going against the grain of normal life, where you have to wait till death. But if you wait till death, that's fine too, because then the knots are open at that point. As energies do converge back into the central channel naturally, and all the work, it's kind of the fruition of all the work you've done. Now you have now the door is open, and now you can enter in with your skills and with your meditative focus, etc. And then while the individual is in tukdom, we can surmise that at that point, this structuring is taking place of a light form. And I should also say at this point, you're probably familiar with the art of Alex Gray. He's got this one triptych where it shows the body with chakras and so on, and then it's got it more with the energy streaming out, and then it's got it even more expanded. And the last one is really a torus. And I think that's extremely accurate of him, since he made these paintings long ago. There's no reason to assume that our light body is in the shape of a body. Why would you need the shape of a body when you have a light form? It's more in the form of a torus. It's a toroidal shape. And in the same way, the sun has a body, except we see it as a sphere, just because that's our perception. And I'm sure the planet itself has a body. It certainly has a body. It's moving through space in time, so it's a time body, so that our perception perceives it as a sphere, because we can't understand fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional geometry, what that would look like. So this light body is structuring, and you could say there's a completion of a lot of different, even though much of light body is accomplished while you're alive, then at death, kind of the final phases have to take place, which again can take place while you're still alive too. And then a person leaves their body while they're still alive. They turn to light because they completed that process before having to go into tukdom. And I would even say that many of the great lamas, they didn't achieve that during their life intentionally. They stayed around, and it's like the prayers that we're always doing in Buddhism of, oh, please don't enter nirvana yet. Hang around a little longer. We know you could just burst into light any second, but please, for our sake. And it's more than just their intention. I'm sure there's a whole karmic matrix of phenomena that determines when it's time for them to split. It's outside even of their control to a certain extent. There's cosmic reasons for things, right?
So you're seeing, from your view, tukdom and rainbow body are separate activities, or is tukdom of kind of first stage?
Yeah, I'd say it's a preparatory. Anyone who can achieve tukdom, you would assume that they're rainbow. But again, I'm not that happy with the idea of you got a rainbow body or you don't have a rainbow body. That makes no sense. there must be a long process. So, and that is nowhere in any literature that I've seen in the world of any tradition, certainly not in the Tibetan tradition of here's what the 20% rainbow body is like, here's what a 40%, etc. Now, since I've worked as you could, nowadays they call them a medical intuitive or empath or so on. My training in natural medicine was with 13 years with an extraordinary healer and visionary psychic by the name of Dr. LaPlante in Toronto. So through him, I learned to listen to energy. And so I have my own little monitor of what is required. And I've even written about it. I'm sure it's controversial or outrageous. What percentage light body one must have in order to reincarnate and sort of be in what they call in Buddhism a path winner or a stream winner. So now at least you're in the slipstream. That doesn't mean you couldn't slip back. You go around murdering people, you might lose the shine. But there's a certain amount of development that has to happen. So yeah, it's not so much you got to have a light body. It's like you have to at least get to the point where you can just keep working. Maybe it'll take you, like the practices say, if you do this practice, you could get enlightened in 12, 7, 5, or even one lifetime. Well, probably we're more likely the 12 or the 9 or something like that. But at least, yes, do that. You'll be able to be reborn and find that practice again or similar practice and carry on. Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, tukdom is a final stage or a preparatory stage of some kind of secondary body.
Okay. That makes sense. So moving into the different, like what we see as the viewer of people who have attained rainbow body, there's the shrinking and the staying in a shrunken form. There's the shrinking and then only leaving hair, teeth, and nails, perhaps.
Yeah.
And there's the shrinking and dissolving, and then there's the dissolving even without the death process, kind of like what you were talking about, or as they say, Padmasambhava had,
Yeah.
where he's alive and they don't even have a death process.
Yeah.
What's going on, do you feel, with the like shrinking or the shrinking and the leaving of the teeth and the hair and the nails?
Well, to answer that question, we'll have to go back to the idea again that you had posed to me about what really happens, what's going on, how do you get a light body, and then we can talk a little more about the different phenomena. And again, this is, you could say, theoretical or surmising or based on my perception of it. This can't be verified.
Yes,
And
yes.
anyone can argue all they want because it's not an argument, it's just my statement of how I see it. It's not unlike nutrition. If you eat a lot of PFUs, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, that changes the fats in your body. We know that it makes all kinds of changes. Your cell membrane is mainly fat, lipid. It's a lipid, protein lipid sandwich. So that will change the very nature of your cell membrane, which has all kinds of effects on your health. And it'll change the structure even of your brain, which is largely fat, and the myelin sheath and liver and so on and so on. So in many ways, we are what we eat. That is very, very true. We structure ourselves according to deficiencies, excesses, and so on. Well, the whole alchemy, and that's what it is, the alchemy of light body, and the alchemy of any spiritual endeavor, is you're transforming lower energies into higher energy. That's all it is. That's all it is. Now, lower energies we're getting all the time. We breathe, we eat, we have impressions. These are different types of nutrition or food. Every sensory impression we have, all of our own, the ones that we generate, our emotions, our reactions, all of these are substantial. They all are a substance. They're a particular frequency, you could say. They're a particular configuration. They're both information, and wherever there's energy, there's information. So they're an information matrix and an energy matrix combined together. We normally produce only a small percentage of higher energies, and we could actually open the door to some of those by taking a drug sometimes or having sex. We'll actually experience what it's like to have that energy flowing through our body. Now, of course, medically or biologically, they could point to all kinds of endorphins and, biochemical and neurological processes that relate to some state of bliss, etc. But as far as we're concerned, those cascades of chemicals are just a secondary residue to some energy that's moving through our form. So we produce small amounts of those substances, and the development spiritually, and especially in terms of light body, is to be able to create and accumulate and store and utilize those higher frequency energies, the ones that normally are very, very small supply, minute supply, because only a small amount is required for life. And if you're trying to develop oneself spiritually, you're doing something that is not required for life. The tree is just a tree, and a flower and a cow and a dog. They live out their life in a certain cycle, and they don't have the possibility. Well, not all. I wouldn't say that. I've seen some animals that are pretty tripped out, that even actually attain rainbow body. Actually, normally we only produce a small amount, and that's all that's required for life. So if you're going for spiritual development, you have to develop those in the surplus, in excess, in extraordinarily large amounts compared to the average person. And you spend a lot of time doing spiritual work and using one's concentration, focus, one's mind, because consciousness is a requirement for any spiritual work. Otherwise, as they say, monkeys copy meditators and sit like this. They don't necessarily get enlightened for, a few million years, maybe eventually, because maybe even the posture can change something. But consciousness itself, having a conscious focus, is one of the great catalysts for this alchemy. You take the food you eat, you breathe a certain way, you do a certain mantra, but you have to have your consciousness and focus in there to change the chemical, let's call it a chemical bioenergetic reaction, so that you're producing higher substances. If you produce higher enough substances, then that's your nutrition. And in fact, at a certain point, you start your experiences, as we all know, people who work in a spiritual field, after a while, your perception becomes quite a bit richer. You experience life in a much deeper way, it seems. And that's not just because you're happy and enjoying yourself or whatever, but because you're actually taking in different substances than other people. You're actually taking in finer experiences. It's not just, wow, I can see that leaf. No, I'm actually receiving more information in the light and other energies that are radiating from that substance than other people. And in fact, that's why great masters blow on you. They breathe on you, right? When they're blessing, even when they're blessing an object or you, they'll blow on you, because they are now filled with higher frequencies and they can transmit higher frequencies, but they're also receiving higher frequencies through their sense fields. They hear sound differently, etc. Well, people take acid, same thing happens, right? Sound, everything is suddenly unbelievable. It's just you could call it spiritual chemistry. It's alchemy. It's substance, but not substances that we know of in the periodic table, but or even in the electromagnetic spectrum. It's outside of that. 87% or more of that is so-called dark energy and dark matter, which is ridiculous. It's just a term that they use for something they can't measure. So it's dark. There's nothing dark about it. It should have been called light. So that's where some of this alchemy is taking place, in dark energy and dark matter. It's more than 80%, 7%, I think. But anyway, what we know of the physical world is a small percentage of the mass, and they can't account for what else is there. So we don't have to worry. In other words, we don't have to worry about the limitations of biology and so on, because that's a very incomplete science. So when one accumulates that kind of higher frequency, the same idea as you're eating a certain food, it's creating your cells. And what is it? They say every 7 years, everything is turned over, even cells like the brain cells. You have the same cells all your life, but all their components are turned over. So when you start turning over your cellular material And instead, now you're substituting these higher frequency structures. You're eventually creating a light form. Whether we have the devices that could measure differences, I don't know. It may be that if you did, because it's not been done to my knowledge, but if you take someone of very high development and you do all very subtle, I don't know what kind of nucleotide, radioactive nucleotide tests, et cetera, you do, whether you could see, or even photonic testing, whether you would see anything of these higher range substances. I don't think we have the equipment yet to know much of anything. But in any case, those cells are turning into finer substances, subtler substances. You could say they're light, they're photonic, there's certainly a photonic component, but as I say, there's it's a mistake to think there's one. It's a great error in spiritual circles of just saying there's prana or there's chi as if it's one solid block of something. Obviously not. It's a whole spectrum of different energies. And just the same as people do know that chakras run on different fuel, but our awareness runs on different fuel and our cells run on different possible fuels. And so some people, their cells, highly advanced adepts, their cells are running on some kind of jet fuel, and we're running on kerosene, by comparison. So that's what happens. That's how light forms. It is definitely said that the body disappearing into pure light and just leaving the residues of dead tissue, the hair and the nails, and the body shrinking down is based on doing different practices. That is a fact that is taught in the tradition. You do different practices, you still get a light body, but a different final effect is left over, you could say. And I can't tell you from tradition, that knowledge of what that difference is might be there in the tradition. I don't know what that is, but from my own perspective, you could say that those who shrink down, which my great teacher, Kalu Rinpoche, that's what happened to him. His body became the size of an 8-year-old. And I've seen his tukum, where he still is encased there in the golden stupa. That means that whatever was required to create his afterlife body was used, right? So if he only needed 70% or 60% that had been transformed, and the rest, then it became a shrunken down replica. Everything else was light. And it doesn't mean there's a less of a light body. It's just that that's all that was needed. And, that's the residue. Only 70%, maybe it's better, only 70% was required. I believe, myself personally, it's related to whether you're doing practices more related to deity or more practices related to pure shunyata or dzogchen mahamudra, which means pure dharmakaya. You're just going into open original consciousness. Or if you're going into a light body form, taking on a light body form that you've practiced all your life to inhabit, which is called deity yoga, we call it, right? And that's the same in the Shaivite tradition, same in the Buddhist tradition. You meditate on a deity because that is the plaster of Paris form that you're pouring your light into, so that when you die, you're reborn instantly in a non-physical state as the yidam. Right? You arise just as you practice your whole life. That's what you do. You practice creating the yidam and arising as a yidam. Even when you finish your meditation, you go, okay, the meditation's over. Now I arise again as the deity. And then you carry on the rest of your day, knowing in somewhere that you are the deity. And by holding to that light form, which is a prefabricated, you could say, light containment field, then your light body can conform to that light body field. And when you die, you have it even when you're alive, and maybe perform extraordinary, miraculous, appear here and there, go wherever you want in that light form. So it's probably a handy thing to have a light body form, depending on the deity that you've taken as your own. They fill their body with dharmakaya light, and then there's no residue at all. That doesn't mean that they couldn't take a form. I have no idea, because I ain't there. But
So is
talk to
rain
me after I die. I'll give you better answers.
right? We'll check back in the afterlife there.
Yes.
So is rainbow body a would you say because we have Zog, there's Dzogchen where they have the system actually talks about right. You have Trechko and Togal.
You know.
They say master those leads the path to rainbow body, and there's even the Young Talk tradition of the Tibetan medicine. Dr. Nita has a book about
Yes.
this. Is rainbow body a goal, and or is it a byproduct of one lives? Because like in Father Francis Tiso's book Rainbow Body and Resurrection, he met Lama Achu, who
Mhm.
actually told him, when I die, if you want to stick around, I'm gonna have a rainbow body experience. And he did. He shrunk. So is this a goal, or is it a byproduct of how one lives their life?
Well, it could be both. I'm sure there's some very saintly people who incidentally achieve rainbow body, but I would say much more often, I would say almost always, it would have to be through a dedicated set of knowledge and practices, not just incidentally, uh, maybe after, 2 million lifetimes or whatever of good works, maybe karma accumulates in a certain way. But even then, karma would accumulate in such a way that then you meet teachings which can finally take you the rest of the way. Without technique, it seems absurd. It's like, I'm going to sit here forever, but I'm going to paint a beautiful painting one day because I'm a good person. A beautiful painting is going to be there. Unlikely. So there's a technology involved, unfortunately or fortunately, and that creates a lot of conundrums and a lot of problematical that is required. But one thing I didn't mention in all of this, which is central to it all, of course, is the five elements. Here's my five element cards. Um, the five elements are a uh, phenomena that is shot through all of these different situations we're talking about. It's a persistent and consistent component of all of this, of the idea. It's actually at the very core of Vajrayana, of Tibetan Buddhism, Bhutanese Buddhism, is the idea that you're purifying the elements. You're wanting to come in touch with a higher level of the same elements. We are made up of the five elements, but it's in its step down state. It's in its corrupted state, or it's in its tangled state, impure state. And we want to be able to achieve a state of purification, which they call the five wisdoms, right? If you achieve full realization of your potential, your light body, then it is tantamount to, and in fact, that's what we do in our rituals. We wear a crown, and all the deities have a crown of the five wisdoms, the five elements in their purified form. So that's another thing to understand is I sometimes call it, and I made some diagrams. I like making slides and diagrams in my books, so on. But I call it enlightenment by the pancake method. So if you imagine a mandala, because the five elements are in a mandala usually, like this kind of idea of the five elements. Oh, there's a better one. So there's the five elements. And if you imagine these five elements of the body, the five elements of the mind, the five elements of the spirit, or you could start with the atom. Sorry, atom, molecules, organs. There's multiple layers, maybe not an infinite number, but there's a number of layers of five elemental, you could say mandalas, but really represents a five elemental matrix or phenomena of higher and higher frequency. So enlightenment would be your high frequency mandala pancaking down into your actual physical body. And in fact, that's a big part, like these five element cards that I made and the books that I'm writing. Most of those practices are involved with bringing the pure five elements into your impure form. And that is maybe one of the most important. I think it's a central practice of light body formation. You have to purify your five elements in one way or another. And there's different techniques for that in different traditions. But the Buddhist tradition really emphasizes that in a great way, and including the Japanese version, Shingon, Japanese Tantra, and Shaivite practices. So everything that came out of India, and as it swept through, went north and south and so on, those 5 elemental practices, which probably originated somewhere in India, or maybe Mesopotamia, maybe Babylonia, we don't know, because there's traces of it in Egypt, there's traces elsewhere. I've done lots of work in trying to sift through the potential history of the 5 elements in the dark, mysterious fog of time, right? The mist of time. But there's traces of it everywhere, but not called elements, but given the name of various deities, right? There are deities, always deities to fire and to water and so on. And we just don't know all the practices that were done in ancient Chaldea or Babylon and Assyria, etc. So these are lost to us, or maybe it's still a living tradition somewhere. I haven't ran into it yet.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about the elements, because I feel I have this theory that because the elements were made of the elements, the universe is made of the elements, everything, like you said, is layered with elements. That rainbow body, light body we're like the elements that are creating this structure are like from the inside out, we're like dissolving back into what we are, into what is. And that if humans weren't so layered down or covered with karma and beliefs and poison through food and what have you, that we would all maybe die in this way,
Yeah.
possibly, if we weren't so. It seems like the natural way of moving on to what is next.
In this one we're showing, as you can see, it's the mandala, but it's a mandala within a mandala,
Right.
right? So this sub elements within elements, or sub elements. So there are, to say everything's made of the 5 elements, people say, well, that's ridiculous. How can everything be made of just 5 things? Well, actually, all of the millions of kinds of DNA are only made from 5 different pieces. But the idea is there are elements within elements, structured within elements and sub-elements and so on. But because of that, there's a natural resonance or connection. So fire element on whatever level is also connected to all levels of fire element. So in some ways, that's our saving grace, in that our step-down elements do have a direct relationship to the purest of elements on whatever cosmic sphere that might be. So purifying our elements, yes, we can actually ascend, you could say, bring our elements up to that frequency. So yeah, that's definitely part of the light body process. That's an essential part of the light body process. And even in these the yogas that I don't know yogas, I call them bioenergy movements that I've developed. I've kind of taken some brilliant work that's been developed in Qigong and Naidan, which is inner alchemy, that are thousands of years old, and brought in a 5 elemental component that doesn't exist there. In fact, of course, they have the 5 processes. They call them 5 elements, but they're actually 5 processes, which are quite different than the 5 elements in the Chinese and the Western systems. But they actually can be brought together in a beautiful way that helps to bring your elements up another level, you could say. All of these phenomena equally assist your health, your health and well-being. They're not just for some rarefied state of development or enlightenment, which is not everybody's cup of tea. That's not everybody's karma. That not everybody has to be doing that. They can use these same techniques, which you could say are light body techniques, but they're going to make you a healthier, stronger, more fulfilled, better balanced, more sane human being. Matter of fact, I think basic sanity is a requirement for enlightenment, but that's again controversial. Because
Or maybe it is enlightenment.
yeah, it is on a certain level. Yeah,
Clarity, right? Like how we
yeah,
handle the emotional ups and downs of life. I feel like that's a form or of
yes,
enlightenment,
yeah,
especially these days.
yeah, yes.
Okay. This is
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
coming to dwell in our. Uh, I like the term, and in all my books, I use that, and I've copied that shamelessly, and I make no bones about it. Gurdjieff G.I. Gurdjieff, the great mystic from, from the 40s, died in the late 40s. He called it, in the tradition that he taught, which he called esoteric Christianity. Sometimes he called it secret Sufism, hard to say, but in that tradition, they make a differentiation psychologically between these two components of our being, of our mind, called essence, who we really are, and persona, all the crap that has been poured into us through family, schooling, tradition, modeling, copying. So being able to differentiate those two is a major accomplishment in life, if you can do that and know who you are essentially and what has been written into your being and the way you really are. This is my height, this is the color of my eyes, these are my predispositions, this is what I'm good at, this is what I love, this is how I see things. I'm a joyous person, I'm a slightly cynical person, whatever. There's many varieties of beings, but essence is still essence. And you can tell essence in another person. You can see when they're in persona, when they're speaking from their talking head, from their artificial fabricated self, and when they're talking from we say speaking from your heart, but speaking from your essential being. And you can feel the difference. It's impactful. Yeah. And by the way, here's a great secret. Only essence can attain rainbow body. Persona can't. This is you sent me some questions. You were asking about Western students and so on. That is the greatest secret. If you're living your life in persona, an artificial construct can only upgrade. It can't develop or mature. Only essence can mature and develop. So if you spend your whole life in a Buddhist persona or a Shaivite persona or a shamanic persona, and nothing really entered your essence, nothing's happening. It's just a big dream. So the spiritual work is a psychological journey. Very, very, very much so. And that is the biggest problem and conundrum for Westerners and Easterners, because I've been around quite a while, and I've seen a lot of very screwed up, developed people. I've seen people with tremendous luminosity that were, sexual predators, thieves, selfish in all kinds of ways, liars, pathological liars. You could even say they're narcissists and they're pathological, even psychopathic, sociopathic. Yet they have developed a certain amount of skill. So it's quite problematical, because they can never go further. And in fact, in the Tibetan tradition, they're cognizant of that in a certain way. And they say that such beings will be reborn as demons or as Yalgong, which means like someone who's very arrogant in life. They'll be this very brazen, arrogant demon, or ghost, you could say, in another realm. They've developed enough to create something that can outlive their body, but it's not something nice. So yeah, it's quite problematic to go into, they call it spiritual bypassing, don't they? To go into spiritual work without having done the psychological background that you needed. And that's a problem too, because modern psychology to me fails miserably in helping people become basically sane, right? Matter of fact, there's no definition in modern psychology of normal. They actually don't know what normal is. So it's hard for them to define that and to be able to tell us what that would look like.
It seems that, at least from what is recorded and what is documented in the Tibet, let's just stay focused on, I guess, the Tibetan tradition, but even in the Hindu yogic traditions and such, that people who attain the rainbow body, whatever form it is, a great number of them, we can say, have either their entire life or a lot of their life are dedicated to retreat. They're usually either monks or sadhus or nuns. There's lay people as well that have been reported that this is happening to, but they're they're still part of that culture, the Tibetan culture, the Indian culture, the Hinduism in India. It seems like so many people who have documented attained rainbow body cases, they have so much time in caves and retreats and that ecstatic lifestyle. And if this is, which it sounds like to me from what I'm hearing from all these people I'm interviewing, this is a high form or an ultimate form of enlightenment, of being a completely realized, fully loving, compassionate, embodied human being, we can say, I guess, as a definition for enlightenment. Is it possible, there's a question, for people living in the West, engage in Western affairs, like parents, people engaged, with to-do lists, entrepreneurs who are on a spiritual path, but not like living in the caves and doing the retreats and such, can we attain that same level of enlightenment as the beings that have rainbow body occurrences, in your opinion?
Let's hope so. Yeah, the obstacles are great. There's no question in the modern era. And I do believe they're certainly significantly greater than they were in the past, because those venues are not necessarily available. Yet at the same time, as many lamas have noted, gee, those Westerners are pretty quick to pick up this stuff. Our minds are in a different format. I just said in my little blog last month that when I got out of 3-year retreat, I realized that not only the content of our minds had changed, or the minds of people had changed, but the structure of people's minds had changed, even in the 3-year time, that there was a difference in the way they were fabricated. And so we can't just put the old square peg into the round hole of what was done in the 11th century or the 5th century, etc. We do have to develop our own methodology, our own path. And that is happening. I always say we're like the lungfish, the first fish to come out onto dry land. They were able to burrow under the water and somehow their fins started to develop into limbs. And next thing you know, they're crawling across the sand, and they're lizards. So all of us in the last few generations, my generation and the ones after, maybe one or two generations before mine, are the lungfish. We're the next cohorts, the next generation of spiritual seekers. It took 200-300 years for Dharma to be transmitted from India to Tibet. And they already shared a tremendous amount of culture and linguistic possibilities and so on. Whereas we've only been, I would say, the 20th century. I won't count what happened in the 17th, 18th, or Alchemy or whatever. Our era, this different era that we're in, the technological era or the air element era, era of extraordinary forms of communication, such as this one that we're on. That's all part of the same era, where the television, I remember the first TVs, I'm old enough. I remember phone booths, but even that's still a phone. It was still unbelievably strange. You could dial across the ocean even then. So we're still in process. So I'm not giving up yet, because it's very, very young. It's very, very recent that we've been thrust into this particular context. So there's many, many mistakes being made, incredible mistakes on the part of teachers, on the part of students, and even the teachings themselves. I'm not a fan of every New Age make-believe, make-it-up-yourself thing that comes out. I'm a traditionalist in that sense, even though I consider myself a heretic because I listen to my own inner voice. So that's heretical, I suppose. I'm not saying that I'm not upholding, even though I'm wearing this, I'm not saying I'm upholding Buddhism or I stand for Buddhism. I don't, because I'm not interested in tainting them with my concepts, but I have to follow my inner truth. So that's what we're trying to do. We're all flopping around, splashing around in the ocean, finding our way. And I think there is a lot of guidance, and we have to trust in the five wisdom. We have to trust that there is some guidance there, even in this chaos, and that we can find our way through. So yeah, I think we have a tremendous opportunity to develop. When you see people that are studying or have studied in depth Sufism and Buddhism and five other things, but they're not just mixing it together like the Tibetans call it tukpa, like a soup, but they're actually appreciating what each one has to offer, and they're trying to extract the gold from each of them. I think that's very inspiring. I think that's extraordinary. Again, a lot of mistakes can be made, and people can go off the deep end very easily, and they do, and they think that they've got something they don't, or they think they're a guru and they aren't, or whatever. And there's lots of spiritual cults around. I can, throw a pebble and I'll hit 10 of them in Santa Monica or anywhere else. But nonetheless, as I say, we're very young in this process, and I'm going to be optimistic about it. Yes, we can achieve these things.
Yeah.
And I do know some extraordinary people, and they're inspiring. They can do that. It just won't be in the same way. Yeah, and of course, I know people that are in my 3-year retreat or before me, so that they became lineage holders. They're teaching to other Buddhists and so on and so forth. I don't have any interest. I love the Buddhist technology, but I'm not trying to hold myself to the Buddhist dogma. I always say Dharma wins out over dogma. Dharma means truth. So I'd rather have a truth than a dogmatic structure. I have a lot of air elements, so that means I'm inventive, creative. I'm looking for answers. I'm not looking for a structure to live in. As a matter of fact, I can't stand those structures. I keep breaking them.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
So yeah, I think it's quite possible. But there is the problem of the teaching, the teacher, and the student. There's a problem with all three. We're getting teachings which may have been bent, twisted, or corrupted in a certain way, or they're partial, there's omissions. And then we have teachers that are, maybe they don't know that they don't know, or maybe they're false teachers, or maybe they know this much, but they don't know this much. It reminds me always of celebrities who are basically actors, but they're going to talk about politics, and they're going to wait a minute, you're just an actor, just keep to what you do. The same thing with the spiritual teachers. They may have a certain amount of knowledge, but it doesn't. And I've often looked sadly with people going to Tibetan teachers for questions about their Western lifestyle, especially Tibetan teachers who don't speak any English and who've never been married, et cetera, et cetera. It's not that they don't mean well, but people have a wrong idea about omniscience, right? Omniscience doesn't mean you know everything about everything. You just know all about the most important thing. That's okay, And I've met Tibetans who don't know how to dial a phone yet, or talk on a cell phone. That's possible. I remember there was one Umze, who's a chant master. He'd just gotten out of, this is when we were taking the empowerments for a 3-year retreat. He had just gotten out of Tibet. And they said, "Oh, Kala Rinpoche is on the phone here." And he was bowing down. He said, "Where is he?" "He's on the phone." He had never actually seen a telephone. And he was bowing down to the phone, kind of very interesting. So, but he was a highly realized being, amazing man. So knowing the minutia of life is not necessarily the purview of an enlightened master. That's not their arena, So again, masters may know one thing, and you may have to go like, famous Chompo Nalchor, the head of the lineages that I follow, the Shangpa lineage. He's said to have 500 different teachers. I'm sure he got something valuable from all of them. So for me, it's okay to look around or come across things. You don't even have to look. I don't look for anything, but I come across things, and I'm very happy when they cross my path. So yeah, there's hope.
I'm so glad you brought this up. I think this is a great point of of going to like a master, for example, who's a master of one thing, that doesn't mean they're a master of all things. I think that's huge information. So yeah,
Yeah.
so one reason I'm doing this documentary and talking to people like you is I'm intending to find a way, like what is our way of being um, people like me and maybe yourself who are in this Western world reality, who are on a spiritual path, who want to reach great heights, or who want to be the most fullest alive human being that we can, go all the way is what I call it. And but how do we do it? And or what is a way? Like what are some,
Yes.
not like to create a manual or a system, but what are some like looking at some of these masters and like even like Jesus, for example, like using them as role models or using them as examples to not mimic them or copy them, but to like, oh, what did they do that worked? And then how can I embody that in my own unique way? Do you know Lauren Roche, who wrote the Radiant Sutra? He translated the Radiant Sutras, the Vajrayana Tantra.
Oh, no, I know the book, but I know I don't know him.
Okay, he's in the California area. Anyway, I interviewed him and his wife,
Hmm.
and I asked them this similar question, and he brought up something that was totally, for me, hit me very personally and almost changed and changed my life, in my mind especially. And it was around Westerners implying techniques or practices from meditation traditions, like say from Buddhism or from a yoga tradition, onto their lives, either prematurely or not with a teacher, or just taking something they read from a book or watched on YouTube and doing it,
Yeah.
doing whether it's a practice. And I realized that I've been, because I haven't had, I practice certain forms of Buddhism my whole life, but I've never really done it formally or have a
Yeah.
teacher. But I've been taking these meditation systems like Dzogchen, for example, and applying them to my life. And what I noticed happening is they actually started working, but
Yeah.
they were taking me out of it was making my day-to-day life as a father and a husband and an entrepreneur and dealing with these worldly situations that I'm in very, very challenging.
Yeah.
Do you see kind of like an inherent like danger or hazards for Westerners to just do that, like what I said, and we can answer that another time because I know it's a
Yeah.
big question.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do that. The simple answer is it's not a simple answer. It's a simple answer, but it is a incisive answer, unfortunately. It's an unexpected answer, which is that what you need, what I always wanted, and what you need is somebody who could say, "Oh yeah, I see what you're thinking. Don't think that. Do this. Do that. Oh, you got this. That that someone who could see what's going on with you and advise you or fix you and tell you what you do, just like a doctor, right? And like my wonderful psychic guy, who every time I came in, he'd know exactly what's going on, where the blockage was, work with it, et cetera, et cetera. So, and again, I've written this in blogs, not that anyone paid attention, but I've written it, that if your Lama, uh, tantric master, whatever they are, Sufic master, if they are not able to perceive what you need and perceive where your uh, obstacles are and advise you, then you have to understand that they cannot do that for you. Then you better find someone who can, if you understand that that's important. And when I see patients, my whole thrust is I got to figure out what the heck's going on with them. They have a problem, they have a sickness, or they have an issue. Maybe it's psychological, but they need that solved. And I can't just, oh yeah, look up my cookbook, D for depression, take that, then I'd be an MD, right? I've got to decide what's really going on and use all my different, techniques, faculty, skills, etc. In the same way, a spiritual teacher has to have that capacity. If they cannot sense energy, if they cannot read an individual and listen to what's going on in them, then I'm not saying they're bad or anything else, but then they have no possibility to say, do this technique, do that technique, Shinrezi, etc. And then self-selecting techniques, that's just a roulette. That's a Russian roulette. Maybe it's great, maybe it's terrible, maybe that's a practice for you in 6 months, maybe not. So in my own practice, for example, I'm not a spiritual teacher for my patients particularly, but I give them elemental meditations because I figure out what's going on. Say, oh, your main problem is water element, fire element here. Then here's a meditation for you to do. Here's a visualization for you to do. And maybe here's a mantra for you to do with it. If they're amenable, most of my patients are amenable, but I see people from all walks of life, and most of them are not Buddhists or not connected specifically to any spiritual work, but they might do some mindfulness. They might do whatever they do. So I'll give it to them, and they can do it if they wish. So without that specificity, that's a huge problem. And in terms of Western students, I would say that's a major problem. In terms of light body, that's a major problem. If someone can't say, oh, your light body development is at this level, and here's what you need to do next. If someone can't say that to you, now I know traditional teachers won't say that, right? They're usually not. Though I know of instances where absolutely there is that kind of advice. There's that, you could say, one-to-one advising. Other teachers, they give, empowerments to 6,000 people at once. And, yeah, you might catch something. Maybe the blessings will come. Maybe an invisible teacher will come. I don't discount that. Some people may have disembodied teachers. I'm not one to argue, but one way or another, they have to be getting correct advice as to what to do next. And then at some point, as Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj said, the Sadguru shows up, the inner guru shows up. And if you reach a certain point, then you're getting more inner guidance. Your inner wisdom will guide you. It's like, it's not just, am I hungry for some bacon? But no, my inner wisdom is saying, this is, eat this mango. It's not hunger, but something is, wisdom is there. This is what I need this vibration is what I need for my sustenance right now. And maybe tomorrow it's bacon, but I can sense that one way or another. Maybe I use a pendulum, maybe I douse it, but that specificity is really crucial. If you don't have that, then just even going through a course of study, like 3-year retreat, you go through the course of study. It's not like you're getting individualized service. You do the things and that was the great advice of some of the great masters who visited, like Situ Rinpoche. He said, just follow the program. Okay, follow the program. But Kala Rinpoche, when we were just about to finish, he said, okay, find the best of these 3 practices that you like, that one of these, and one of these, and that's it. And then just do those. And then do that for 12 years in retreat. Thanks a lot. That 3-year retreat was just so you'd find out what is there. And now you pick the ones that really groove with you and do them. That's good advice. Do what you really like, what you're enjoying, what you're attracted to. That's not a bad way of managing one's practice. Yeah. So if it's something that's, difficult or painful, maybe that's not the best right now. It really should be something fairly joyous, It's still arduous, but, there's some subtle joy there.
I agree. Doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was a pleasure connecting with you. Thank you for your time. This was great.
Let me know if there's any way I can add in the future, and I'm around.